Wheelchair-bound widow finds injured cat, believing it's just a burden until it starts to. The silence was the first thing you noticed about Ruth's house. Not a peaceful silence, the kind that settles comfortably after a busy day, but a heavy, stagnant quiet that seemed to press in from the walls, absorbing even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock that hadn't chimed properly since her husband George passed away nearly a decade ago. Ruth Peterson, 78 years old, lived within that silence, a resident of a small, tidy brick house on a quiet street in suburban Pennsylvania. Life, once a bustling affair filled with George's booming laughter, the clatter of children who are now grown and distant, and the satisfying exhaustion of a long nursing career, had contracted, shrinking steadily until it felt contained entirely within these four walls. 3 years ago, a stroke had stolen the strength from her left side, and with it, her independence. The world beyond her front porch became largely inaccessible, viewed primarily through the large picture window in the living room that overlooked a neatly kept but seldom used backyard. Her days were marked by the rhythmic creak of her wheelchair rolling across the polished hardwood floors, the murmur of the radio announcer delivering the morning news, and the painstaking effort of physical therapy exercises that felt more like a reminder of her limitations than a path to recovery. Resignation had settled over her like a shroud, a heavy acceptance that this diminished existence was the final chapter. Her children called, of course, Sarah from California once a week, Michael from Florida every other Sunday, their voices bright but distant, filled with the concerns of their own busy lives, lives that felt worlds away from Ruth's quiet house. They offered help, suggested assisted living suggestions. Ruth politely, firmly declined. This house held the ghosts of her whole life, leaving it felt like a final surrender she wasn't ready for. The autumn morning arrived like most others, draped in the cool, damp air that hinted at the coming winter. The maple tree in the backyard was a blaze of defiant orange and red, a splash of vibrant color against the otherwise muted palette of Ruth's world. She wheeled herself to the front door, a routine task undertaken with practiced, deliberate movements. Opening the heavy wooden door required leveraging her good right arm against the frame, a small daily struggle. She reached for the mailbox mounted beside the door, her fingers fumbling slightly with the cold metal latch. That's when she saw it. Curled into a tight, miserable ball on the top step was a small ginger cat. It wasn't a kitten, but it wasn't fully grown either, perhaps a stray adolescent, lost and battered by the world. Its fur was matted with mud and burrs, clinging damply to its thin frame. One of its front paws was held awkwardly off the ground, swollen and caked in dried mud that hinted at an injury beneath. The creature didn't hiss or flee as the door opened. It simply lifted its head, its movement slow and pained, and looked up at Ruth. Its eyes, large and amber, held a startlingly direct gaze, a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and something that looked unnervingly like expectation. Ruth froze, her hand hovering over the mailbox. A cat, a stray cat, dirty, injured, and undeniably present on her doorstep. Her first instinct was annoyance. Another complication, another thing needing care she felt ill-equipped to provide. Strays carried diseases, fleas. What was she supposed to do? Call animal control? The thought felt wearying. She wasn't unkind, but life had pared down her capacity for unexpected burdens. She stared at the cat, and the cat stared back, unblinking. Its stillness was unnerving. It wasn't begging, wasn't demanding, just waiting. A memory flickered, unbidden marmalade. The ginger tomcat she'd had as a girl, a boisterous creature full of purrs and playful ambushes. Then another memory, sharper, more recent. Patches, the calico George had brought home impulsively one rainy afternoon, who had curled on the end of their bed for 15 years. The silence in the house seemed to deepen, amplifying the small sounds of the street, a distant car, the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. This cat was nothing like Marmalade or Patches. It was wretched, silent, and alone. Just like her, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind. The thought was unwelcome, too close to the bone. She sighed, a long, weary exhalation that fogged the cool morning air. Her resolve, already weakened by years of quietude, crumbled under the weight of those amber eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, the words gravelly from disuse. "Don't just sit there looking pathetic. You'll catch your death." She maneuvered her wheelchair backward, pulling the door wider. "Come on, then. Get yourself in here before you freeze." The cat didn't move immediately. It watched her, perhaps gauging the sincerity of the invitation or summoning the strength to move its injured body. Then, slowly, tentatively, it limped across the threshold, dragging its swollen paw. It stopped just inside, on the worn floral pattern of the entryway rug, looking small and out of place against the backdrop of Ruth's meticulously ordered home. It shivered, either from cold or pain, maybe both. Ruth closed the door, shutting out the crisp autumn air and sealing herself in with her unexpected guest. The silence was different now, punctuated by the cat's quiet, ragged breathing. She looked down at it, a wave of uncertainty washing over her. What had she done? Getting supplies was the first hurdle. She couldn't just run to the store. She considered calling Sarah, but hesitated. It seemed trivial, explaining she'd taken in a stray cat and needed food and litter. It would inevitably lead to questions, concerns about her ability to cope. Instead, she called Martha, her neighbor from across the street. Martha was younger, maybe early 60s, perpetually busy with grandchildren and gardening, but always kind. "Martha, it's Ruth Peterson." "Ruth, hello. Everything all right?" Martha's voice was warm, slightly breathless. "I'm fine, dear. I seem to have acquired a cat." Ruth explained the situation briefly, feeling slightly foolish. Martha chuckled. "Well, isn't that something? A little ginger thing, you say? Injured? Oh, the poor dear. Tell you what, I'm heading to the supermarket later this morning. I can pick up some basics for you. Food, litter box." Relief washed over Ruth. "Oh, Martha, would you? That would be wonderful. Just some dry food, maybe a can of wet, and a small litter tray and litter. I can pay you back, of course." "Nonsense, Ruth. Consider it a welcome gift for your new friend. I'll drop them off around lunchtime." While she waited, Ruth tackled the immediate problem, the injured paw. She filled a basin with warm water in the kitchen sink, added a drop of gentle soap. Getting down to the cat's level was impossible. She wheeled herself near where it huddled on the rug, holding the basin precariously on her lap. "All right, you," she said softly. "Let's see that paw. Don't you bite me now." The cat flinched as she reached for it, but didn't resist further. Gently, talking in a low, soothing tone she hadn't used in years, Ruth lifted the injured paw. It was caked with dried mud and what looked like blood. The swelling was significant. Using a soft cloth dipped in the warm water, she carefully, painstakingly began to clean the wound. The cat trembled but remained still, watching her face intently. Beneath the grime, there was a nasty gash, deep and inflamed. It needed more than just cleaning. "Oh dear," Ruth murmured. "That looks bad. That looks like it needs a vet." Another complication, another phone call. She finished cleaning the paw as best she could, dried it gently, and then sat back, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders. The cat licked tentatively at the cleaned wound, then looked up at her again, a flicker of something less fearful in its amber eyes. Martha arrived just before noon, bustling in with 2 shopping bags and a cheerful smile. "Here we are. Got you some kitten food. Thought it might be easier on its tummy, and a nice soft canned option. And the litter box essentials. Where's the little patient?" The cat had retreated slightly, watching Martha's arrival from the edge of the living room. Martha cooed. "Oh, he's a handsome fellow, isn't he? Just needs some TLC. Have you thought of a name?" Ruth hadn't. Naming it felt too permanent, too much like acceptance. "Not yet," she said. "His paw looks quite bad, Martha. I think he needs a doctor." Martha's brow furrowed with concern as she took a closer look. "Oh, you're right, Ruth. That does look nasty. There's Dr. Miller down on Maple Avenue. He's very good. Getting him there might be tricky for you, though." "Yes," Ruth agreed quietly. Getting herself anywhere was tricky. Getting a reluctant cat into a carrier and into a car she couldn't drive seemed insurmountable. "Tell you what," Martha said, ever practical. "Let me call Dr. Miller's office. See if they can squeeze him in this afternoon. If they can, I can come back after my lunch and help you get him there. Would that be all right?" Tears pricked Ruth's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. The kindness, the simple offer of help, felt overwhelming in her solitary world. "Martha, that's incredibly kind of you. Thank you." "Neighbors help neighbors, Ruth," Martha said gently, patting her arm. "Now, let's get this little guy settled." They set up the litter box in a corner of the laundry room, off the kitchen. Ruth opened the can of soft food, the fishy smell filling the air. She placed a small amount on a saucer near where the cat was hiding. It watched, wary, but the aroma was clearly tempting. After Martha left to make the vet appointment, the cat crept forward, sniffing the food, and then began to eat, slowly at first, then with more urgency. Ruth watched it, a complex mix of emotions swirling within her: annoyance, pity, apprehension, and a tiny, fragile spark of something else. Connection, responsibility. Whatever it was a change. The heavy silence of the house felt subtly altered, charged with the presence of this small, wounded creature. The cat finished eating, cleaned its face meticulously despite its injury, then limped back toward the living room, choosing a spot on the rug near the radiator, curled up, and promptly fell asleep. Ruth wheeled herself to the window, looking out at the blaze of the maple tree. The world outside remained distant, unchanged, but inside something had shifted. A small, injured ginger cat had breached the walls of her isolation, bringing with it mud, worry, and the unexpected weight of another heartbeat in the quiet house. She didn't know if she was ready for it, didn't know if she could handle it, but as she looked at the sleeping cat, a tiny island of warmth in the cool room, she knew she couldn't turn it away now. The silence hadn't been broken, not really, but it felt a little less empty. Martha returned an hour later, carrying an old, slightly battered cat carrier. "Dr. Miller can see him at 2:30, she announced cheerfully. "Said it sounds like a nasty tear, possibly an abscess starting. Good thing you took him in, Ruth." Getting the cat into the carrier proved more difficult than anticipated. Despite his injury, the small creature seemed to understand the plastic box meant confinement. He flattened himself under a dusty end table, his amber eyes wide with renewed fear. Ruth couldn't bend down, couldn't reach. She felt a familiar wave of frustration and helplessness wash over her. Martha, however, was unfazed. With gentle coaxing and a bit of strategic maneuvering using a broom handle, she managed to nudge the cat towards the carrier's opening. A final, quick scoop, a brief scrabble of claws against plastic, and the door clicked shut. The cat let out a low, unhappy growl from within. "There we go," Martha said, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead. "Little fella's got some spirit." The drive to the vet clinic was short, but for Ruth, it was an ordeal. Transferring from her wheelchair to Martha's passenger seat required significant effort, leaving her breathless and trembling slightly. She hadn't been in a car in months. Watching the familiar streets pass by felt strangely alienating, like viewing her town through a stranger's eyes. Inside the carrier on the back seat, the cat remained tense and silent. Ruth found herself murmuring to it, quiet reassurances that felt as much for herself as for the animal. "It'll be all right. Just getting that paw fixed. You'll feel better soon." Dr. Miller, a kind man with graying hair and gentle hands, confirmed Martha's suspicion. It was a deep gash, likely from a fight or sharp debris, and infection had set in. He cleaned the wound thoroughly, administered a local anesthetic, and put in 3 small stitches. An antibiotic injection was given, along with a bottle of oral antibiotics for Ruth to administer twice daily. The cost, displayed on the receptionist's screen, made Ruth's stomach tighten, an unexpected expense on her fixed income, but she nodded, writing the check with a slightly shaky hand. Martha helped her back into the car, the carrier now containing a slightly groggy, bandaged cat. "Thank you again, Martha," Ruth said, her voice thick with gratitude, as they pulled back into her driveway. "I don't know how I would have managed." "Think nothing of it, Ruth," Martha insisted, helping her back into her wheelchair, which she'd brought out to the driveway. "You just focus on getting this little one healed up. Call me if you need anything else, hear?" Back inside the quiet house, Ruth released the cat from the carrier. It limped out, shook its head as if trying to clear the lingering effects of the anesthetic, and immediately sought refuge in the warmest spot it had found earlier, the patch of floor near the radiator. It curled up tightly, burying its bandaged paw beneath its body, and closed its eyes. The next few days fell into a new tentative rhythm. Twice a day, Ruth faced the challenge of administering the liquid antibiotics. She'd crush a small pill pocket treat, mix the medicine in, and offer it carefully. The cat was suspicious at first, but hunger, or perhaps a dawning understanding that she meant no harm, eventually won out. It would lick the concoction hesitantly from the saucer she held out. Ruth also had to check the bandage, dabbing gently around the edges with antiseptic as the vet had instructed. This required her to wheel close, to lean down as far as her stiff body allowed, bringing her face near the cat's. It watched her movements, tense but still, accepting her touch with a quiet resignation that slowly, almost imperceptibly, softened into tolerance, and then perhaps trust. She still hadn't named him. The cat felt impersonal, clinical. She watched him one afternoon as he slept, curled on the worn cushion of the armchair George used to favor. A sliver of weak autumn sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating his fur. It wasn't just ginger. It was the warm, deep orange of a pumpkin ripening on the vine. "Pumpkin," she said aloud, the name tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. The cat's ears twitched, but he didn't open his eyes. "Pumpkin," she repeated, softer this time. It felt right. Simple, warm, fitting for the season of his arrival. From then on, he was Pumpkin. Pumpkin's paw healed quickly under the care and antibiotics. The bandage came off after a week, revealing tender pink skin beneath the dissolving stitches. His limp lessened daily, until soon he was padding silently around the house, with only the faintest hint of unevenness in his gait. His personality began to emerge from beneath the layers of fear and pain. He remained a quiet cat, not demanding or overly affectionate, but he sought proximity. He'd nap on the rug near her wheelchair, follow her at a distance as she moved from room to room, and sometimes, tentatively, jump onto the ottoman near her feet while she read the newspaper. Ruth found herself talking to him more and more. The silence of the house had always been a heavy burden, amplifying her solitude. Now she filled it with a low, running commentary directed at the ginger cat. "Well, Pumpkin, looks like rain today. My knee always aches when it rains. Did you hear that on the radio? Politics, always arguing. George used to get so worked up. Sarah called last night. She's busy. The children have soccer practice. Sounds exhausting." She paused, realizing she was sharing snippets of her daughter's life with a cat. A sad smile touched her lips. "She asked about you, you know. I told her I had a new roommate." She didn't elaborate much on the phone calls with her children. Sarah's concern felt distant, filtered through miles and the static of a life Ruth no longer recognized. Michael's calls were briefer, filled with updates about his job and reassurances that he'd try to visit soon, a vague promise that rarely materialized. Telling them about Pumpkin felt like admitting the depth of her loneliness, showcasing the small creature that had become her main source of daily interaction. It was easier to keep it light, to mention him briefly as a quirky development, easier than explaining how his quiet presence had become a fragile anchor in her sea of monotonous days. She told Pumpkin things she didn't tell her children. She spoke of George, not just the broad strokes of their life together, but small, specific memories. The way he hummed off-key while washing dishes, the terrible wallpaper he'd insisted on putting up in the kitchen. She'd hated it then, but missed it fiercely now. The fishing trips he'd loved, even though he rarely caught anything. Talking about him brought a familiar ache to her chest, a bittersweetness that mingled grief with fondness. Pumpkin would often just sit and watch her, blinking slowly, sometimes letting out a soft, rumbling purr that seemed to absorb the sadness hanging in the air. One morning, Ruth was going through her prescribed physical therapy exercises, sitting in her wheelchair, concentrating fiercely on trying to flex her weakened left foot. It was a frustrating, often demoralizing process. She focused on wiggling her toes, tiny movements that felt monumental. As she strained, she noticed Pumpkin sitting nearby, watching her intently. He stretched out his front paws, extending his claws, then retracted them, wiggling them against the rug in a gesture that looked remarkably like mimicry. A bubble of surprised laughter escaped Ruth's lips. It was a real laugh, not the polite chuckle she sometimes managed on the phone, but a genuine expression of amusement that startled both her and the cat. Pumpkin paused his wiggling, looking up at her as if surprised by the sound. Ruth laughed again, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Are you mocking me, you silly thing?" she asked, a smile lingering on her face long after the laughter subsided. The moment was small, fleeting, but it felt like a tiny crack letting light into a long, dark room. The most significant shift happened late one afternoon a few weeks later. The initial crisis of Pumpkin's arrival had passed, and a quiet routine had settled upon them. Ruth was sitting by the window, watching the gray dusk settle over the neighborhood, feeling the familiar melancholy creep in. Pumpkin, perhaps sensing her mood or simply bored, suddenly emerged from the hallway closet, dragging something behind him. It was an old, dusty ball of variegated blue yarn, a remnant from a knitting project Ruth had abandoned years ago, long before the stroke. He dropped the yarn ball near the footrest of her wheelchair, then looked up at her, nudging it slightly with his nose. His amber eyes held an unmistakable invitation. Play. Ruth stared at the yarn ball. A complex wave of emotions washed over her. A flicker of warmth at the cat's gesture. A pang of sadness for the hobbies she could no longer enjoy. And a deep, weary resistance to the idea of doing anything beyond her necessary routines. Bending down was difficult, requiring careful bracing with her good arm. Reaching felt precarious. Playing felt frivolous, pointless even. But Pumpkin nudged the yarn again, a soft bump against the metal footrest. He chirped, a small questioning sound. He wasn't demanding, just offering. For the first time since the stroke, Ruth felt a genuine want stir within her, a desire to respond, to engage, to break free, even momentarily, from the passive observation that defined her days. Taking a deep breath, she leaned forward carefully, bracing her right hand on the armrest. Her fingers trembled as she reached down towards the floor. The movement pulled uncomfortably at her back, and her weakened left side offered no support. Finally, her fingertips brushed against the soft, slightly scratchy wool. She managed to grasp the ball, her knuckles white with the effort. She held it for a moment, feeling the unfamiliar weight in her hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, she tossed it a few inches away. Pumpkin pounced, batting the ball with surprising agility, chasing it as it rolled unevenly across the rug. He looked utterly absorbed, a flash of ginger fur against the faded floral pattern. A small, tentative smile touched Ruth's lips. Watching him, she felt another urge. She placed her hands on the large wheels of her chair. It had been ages since she'd moved it for anything other than necessity. Pushing required strength she didn't always have. But she pushed now, just a little, turning the chair slightly so she could better watch Pumpkin's antics. The wheels creaked in protest. Pumpkin, startled by the movement, paused his game, yarn ball trapped under his paws, and looked at her. He couldn't make her stand up. He couldn't make her walk out the door or magically restore the life she had lost. But as she watched him tentatively bat the yarn ball again, a small spark of life rekindled within her, fueled by the simple, shared moment. The house was still quiet, her body still frail, her world still small. But the yarn ball rolling across the floor propelled by a ginger paw, felt like a tiny, undeniable movement forward. It wasn't much, but in the profound stillness of Ruth's life, it felt like everything. The small victory with the yarn ball seemed to awaken something in Ruth, a cautious willingness to engage beyond the bare necessities. During her next online grocery order, scrolling through pages of canned goods and cleaning supplies, she hesitated, then deliberately typed cat toys into the search bar. A feathered wand, brightly colored and inexpensive, caught her eye. She added it to her cart, feeling a mixture of practicality, exercise for the cat, and something akin to indulgence. When the groceries arrived, she extracted the toy. Pumpkin, perched on the armrest of George's old chair, a spot he'd claimed as his own, watched with curious amber eyes. Ruth held the wand out, awkwardly flicking the feathers from her seated position. It wasn't graceful, and her range of motion was limited, but Pumpkin didn't seem to mind. He crouched low, tail twitching, then batted playfully at the feathers, his earlier caution replaced by feline instinct. For 5 minutes, Ruth moved the wand, watching Pumpkin leap and tumble, a silent ballet of orange fur against the faded carpet. It left her arm aching slightly, but a quiet warmth spread through her chest. These brief sessions became a new part of their routine, short bursts of activity that punctuated the long, quiet hours. As the days shortened and the vibrant autumn leaves surrendered to the stark branches of late fall, Ruth's conversations with Pumpkin deepened, becoming less narration and more reflection. The cat was a perfect listener, offering no judgment, no unwanted advice, only a steady, quiet presence. "George always wanted to retire to Florida," she murmured one afternoon, watching Pumpkin meticulously groom his paw in a patch of weak sunlight. He had brochures, circled communities near the ocean, said he wanted to feel the sun on his bones year-round. She sighed, a faint mist on the cold windowpane edge she gazed through. "I never wanted to leave this house. All our memories are here. But sometimes I wonder, would things have been different? Would I be—" She trailed off, the word lonely hanging unspoken in the air. Pumpkin blinked slowly, as if considering her words. She spoke of her children, her voice softer, tinged with a complex blend of pride and sorrow. "Sarah's daughter, Emily, she's starting college next year. Can you believe it? Seems like yesterday Sarah was that age herself. Emily sent me a drawing once when she was little. It's still on the fridge." Ruth glanced towards the kitchen, though she couldn't see the refrigerator door from her spot. "They live so far away, Pumpkin. California feels like another planet sometimes. And Michael, he's doing well in his company, works so hard. But his boys, I've only seen them a handful of times. They're practically strangers." She stroked Pumpkin's soft fur as he hopped onto the ottoman near her feet. "It's not their fault. Life gets busy, but it's hard, feeling like a distant relative instead of a grandmother." Sometimes she talked about her nursing career, the demanding shifts, the difficult patients, the small triumphs and heartbreaks. "You see a lot of life in a hospital, Pumpkin," she whispered, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing as he napped. "Beginnings and endings, so much struggle, but so much strength too. I used to think I was strong." Her hand rested on the arm of her wheelchair, the cold metal a stark reminder of her body's betrayal. "Now, just getting dressed feels like climbing a mountain." The quiet rhythm of their life was abruptly shattered one cold Tuesday morning. Ruth had wheeled herself into the small bathroom off the main hallway. The home health aide, Carla, wasn't due for another hour. Ruth needed to use the commode, a transfer she usually managed with careful, practiced movements, using the grab bars installed on the wall. But that morning, her weakened left hand slipped on the cool metal bar just as she was shifting her weight. Her balance vanished. There was a terrifying moment of weightlessness, then a sickening lurch as her body tilted sideways. She cried out, a sharp gasp of fear as she slid from the wheelchair seat, landing heavily on the cold tile floor. Pain shot through her hip and shoulder. For a moment, she just lay there, stunned, the white hexagonal tiles pressing against her cheek. Panic began to rise in her throat, hot, tight, suffocating. She tried to push herself up with her right arm, but the angle was wrong, the pain too sharp. She was stuck, truly, utterly stuck, alone. Then a soft sound. Pumpkin appeared in the doorway, drawn by her cry. He approached cautiously, ears slightly flattened, making a low, questioning meow. He nudged her outstretched hand gently with his head, then again. Seeing she didn't respond beyond a shaky breath, he didn't retreat. Instead, he settled himself on the cool tiles beside her hip, tucked his paws beneath him, and began to purr. It wasn't a happy, contented purr, but a low, steady rumble, a vibration of presence in the terrifying stillness. Ruth lay there, the initial panic slowly subsiding, replaced by a cold wave of humiliation and despair. The clock in the hall ticked, each second stretching into an eternity. Outside, she could hear the distant rumble of a garbage truck, the normalcy of the world continuing, indifferent to her plight. She was trapped on her own bathroom floor, unable to rise, with only a small ginger cat for company. Tears welled, hot and stinging, tracking paths through the dust on her cheek. Pumpkin didn't move. He stayed pressed against her, his soft, rhythmic purring a tiny anchor in her sea of helplessness. It didn't solve anything, didn't lessen the pain or the fear, but it meant she wasn't entirely alone in the cold silence. Carla arrived exactly on time, her cheerful greeting dying on her lips as she found Ruth on the floor. With practiced efficiency and soothing words, Carla carefully assessed the situation, checked for injuries, and then, using techniques Ruth recognized from her own nursing days, helped her slowly, painstakingly, back into her wheelchair. Ruth was bruised, her hip throbbing, her shoulder aching, but nothing seemed broken. The deeper injury was to her spirit. The fall had stripped away the fragile illusion of control she clung to, leaving her feeling utterly vulnerable and profoundly old. Carla insisted on calling Dr. Miller's office and also notified Sarah, following the emergency contact protocol. The doctor advised rest and pain relief, scheduling a follow-up check. The call with Sarah later that evening was strained. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? Carla said it was a bad fall." Sarah's voice was tight with worry, edged with a familiar frustration. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just bruised my pride more than anything," Ruth said, trying to sound lighter than she felt. Pumpkin was curled on her lap, his weight a warm comfort. "Mom, we need to talk seriously about assisted living again. What if Carla hadn't been due? What if you'd hit your head? You can't keep living alone like this. It's not safe." "I'm safe enough, Sarah. It was an accident. It won't happen again." Ruth hated the defensive tone in her voice. "How can you know that? You need more help than Carla coming twice a week. You need people around. What about that cat? Is he getting underfoot? Maybe he tripped you." "Pumpkin had nothing to do with it," Ruth snapped, then immediately regretted her sharpness. He stayed with me, Sarah, the whole time I was on the floor." There was a pause. "Mom, a cat isn't help. It's a cat. Please, just think about it. Let me look into some places near you." "I don't want to think about it," Ruth said, her voice low and firm. "This is my home." The rest of the conversation was brief, filled with unspoken tensions. Ruth hung up feeling weary, misunderstood, and lonelier than ever. She looked down at Pumpkin, stroking his soft fur. He purred, kneading gently against her leg. His simple, uncomplicated presence felt more comforting than her daughter's anxious, problem-solving love delivered across miles of telephone wire. In the days following the fall, Ruth moved more cautiously, her confidence shaken. She spent more time simply sitting, watching the world through the window. Pumpkin often joined her, sitting on the sill, his tail occasionally flicking as he watched a squirrel scamper across the lawn or a flock of starlings settle on the bare branches of the maple tree. Ruth watched him watch the world outside. Did he miss it? Did he remember chasing things through tall grass, the freedom of an unbound life? She felt a strange kinship with him in those moments. Both of them, confined within these walls, looking out at a world they could only observe. He was trapped by circumstance, she by her failing body, fellow prisoners of the quiet house. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, sunlight streaming weakly through the clean glass, dust motes dancing in the beams, that Ruth fully acknowledged the depth of her attachment to the small creature purring softly beside her. He had arrived as an unwanted burden, a dirty, injured stray. Now he was everything. Her companion, her confidant, the recipient of her quiet affections, the steady beat of another heart in the overwhelming silence. She loved him, she realized, with a startling intensity, a quiet, desperate kind of love. The realization brought with it a profound sadness. It wasn't that her love for Pumpkin wasn't real or valuable, it was, but its sheer weight, its central place in her emotional landscape, served only to highlight the vast emptiness surrounding it. He filled a space meant for husbands, children, grandchildren, friends. He was solace, yes, but his comfort was a constant bittersweet reminder of all the human connections that had faded or frayed, leaving her reliant on the quiet affection of a rescued cat. She reached out, her fingers stroking the soft fur behind his ears. Pumpkin leaned into her touch, purring louder. It was a blessing, this small creature, a blessing that underscored the depth of her losses. Winter arrived in earnest, stripping the last tenacious leaves from the maple tree and draping the suburban Pennsylvania landscape in shades of gray and white. Inside Ruth's small brick house, a quiet, predictable rhythm asserted itself, dictated by the short daylight hours, the steady ticking of the hall clock, and the shared presence of the woman and the cat. The dramatic events of Pumpkin's arrival and Ruth's fall had subsided, leaving behind a settled normalcy, albeit one defined by limitations and silence. The days unfolded with a gentle monotony. Ruth would wake to the weak morning light, her body stiff and protesting. Pumpkin would often be curled at the foot of her bed, a warm ginger knot against the cool sheets. He'd stretch languidly as she maneuvered herself into her wheelchair, then follow her into the kitchen, weaving around the wheels with quiet familiarity. The sounds of the house were soft, intimate. The whir of the electric can opener preparing Pumpkin's breakfast, the creak of the wheelchair crossing the threshold into the living room, the murmur of the radio announcer, the soft thud of the newspaper landing on the porch, retrieved later by Carla. Pumpkin was no longer just a presence. He was woven into the fabric of Ruth's diminished life. He'd nap on her feet while she laboriously peeled potatoes at the lowered counter George had installed years ago, a concession to her height that now served her seated posture. He'd sit on the armrest of her chair, occasionally reaching out a tentative paw to touch her hand when it lay still on the controls. When Carla arrived, bustling in with her cheerful energy that always seemed slightly too loud for the quiet house, Pumpkin would often be waiting near the door, blinking slowly as if assessing the intrusion before retreating to a favored spot to observe. There were moments of quiet, almost painful sweetness. Ruth watching Pumpkin chase a sunbeam across the floor, a fleeting dance of light and shadow that seemed impossibly energetic in the still room, the soft, comforting weight of him settling onto her lap while she read, his head eventually tucking under her hand, his purr a low, steady vibration against her legs. Sometimes he would simply sit near her, looking up with those clear amber eyes, and Ruth would feel a pang of connection so sharp it almost hurt, a silent understanding passing between two solitary beings. But these moments of warmth were always framed by the stark reality of Ruth's existence, the chronic ache in her hip, a constant reminder of the fall, the view through the picture window showcasing neighbors shoveling snow, children building snowmen, a world bustling with activity just beyond her reach. The silence that descended whenever the radio was off, a heavy blanket that even Pumpkin's soft purrs couldn't fully dispel. The joy Pumpkin brought was real, undeniable, but it existed within the persistent shadow of her losses, her confinement, her encroaching frailty. Carla, the home health aide, noticed the change the cat had wrought, though perhaps only its surface. "Pumpkin's really settled in, hasn't he?" she remarked one morning while checking Ruth's blood pressure. "He's such good company for you, Ruth. I think he's really brought you out of your shell." Ruth offered a small, polite smile. "He's a good cat," she agreed quietly. But inside, she knew it was more complicated. Pumpkin hadn't coaxed her out of her shell. He had crawled inside it with her. He hadn't magically expanded her world. He had made the smallness of it more bearable. He filled the quiet, yes, but his presence also underscored the absence of human voices, laughter, touch. He was essential, beloved, but his importance was a direct measure of her isolation. As the winter deepened, bringing icy winds and long nights, Ruth found her thoughts drifting more often to the passage of time. She watched Pumpkin sleep, noticing the faint silvering of fur around his muzzle, the way he sometimes seemed stiffer when he first woke up. He wasn't a young cat anymore. How old had he been when he arrived on her doorstep? 3? 4? That meant he was approaching middle age himself now, perhaps older. The thought sparked a new anxiety within her. What would happen to him? What would happen if she had another fall, a worse one? What if she had to go into that assisted living facility Sarah kept mentioning, the one that almost certainly wouldn't allow pets? What if she simply didn't wake up one morning? The image of Pumpkin alone again, wandering the silent house, waiting for a door that wouldn't open, brought a sharp ache to her chest. "We have to look after each other, you know," she murmured to him one evening, stroking his back as he lay curled on her lap. "You need to stay healthy, little one, and I need to keep going." Pumpkin responded with a slow blink, pressing his head slightly harder against her hand. The responsibility felt immense, terrifying, yet grounding. Caring for him, ensuring his safety, provided a sense of purpose, however small, in her circumscribed world. One afternoon, a heavy snow began to fall. Large, soft flakes drifted down, silent and persistent, blanketing the backyard in a layer of pristine white. Ruth wheeled herself to the living room window, Pumpkin predictably hopping onto the sill beside her, his tail giving a slow, rhythmic thump against the wood. The world outside was transformed, muffled, beautiful in its stillness. No cars moved on the street, no neighbors were visible. It was a scene of profound quiet, visually echoing the silence within the house. Ruth watched the flakes accumulate on the bare branches of the maple tree, turning it into a stark black and white etching. She felt the familiar warmth of Pumpkin pressed against her arm, heard the low rumble of his purr, a counterpoint to the silent snowfall. In that moment, cocooned in the quiet house, looking out at the hushed world, a sense of calm settled over her, mingled with the ever-present melancholy. She thought of George, of Sarah and Michael, of the life she had lived, the bustling energy, the purpose, the love, the arguments, the everyday chaos she hadn't appreciated until it was gone. She thought of the stroke, the fall, the shrinking of her world to these few rooms. She felt the familiar ache of loss, the grief for her own lost strength, her independence. But she also felt the solid, living warmth of the cat beside her. She looked down at Pumpkin, at his ginger fur, his peacefully closed eyes, the slight rise and fall of his breathing. He hadn't asked to be rescued, hadn't asked for this quiet life. He had simply appeared, wounded and alone, and stayed. He asked for nothing but food, warmth, and a gentle hand, and in return, he offered his steady, uncomplicated companionship. It wasn't the life she had expected to live in her twilight years. It wasn't the bustling retirement George had dreamed of, nor the active grandparenting she had once envisioned. It was a life lived largely in stillness, within four walls, marked by physical limitations and a profound sense of isolation. And yet, there was Pumpkin. There was the shared silence, punctuated by purrs. There was the small effort of flicking a feather wand, the quiet joy of watching him nap in a sunbeam. There was the responsibility of caring for another living creature, the anchor of his routine aligning with hers. There was love, quiet and unassuming, but undeniably real. Ruth reached out, her hand resting lightly on Pumpkin's back. He didn't stir, comfortable and trusting in her presence. No, Pumpkin hadn't erased the sadness. He hadn't cured her loneliness or healed her body. But he sat with her in the quiet, sharing the weight of it. He was a flicker of warmth in the long winter, a steady heartbeat beside her own. He reminded her that even in a shrinking world, even with a body that failed her, there was still room for connection, still a reason to face the quiet dawn of each new day. She accepted it all, the pain, the limitations, the loneliness, and the profound, bittersweet gift of the small ginger cat who had become her reluctant, beloved companion. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world, while inside, in the quiet house, life went on, one slow breath, one soft purr at a time.